The sun bled crimson over the jagged horizon, painting the Wyoming plains in hues of fire and loss. In the heart of Dustwood, a town carved from grit and stubborn pride, a woman stood alone at the edge of a crumbling wooden porch, her silhouette trembling against the dying light. Her name was Clara Hensley, but to the townsfolk, she was nothing more than the widow, or, worse, the joke. Her husband, Tom, had been dead 3 years, gunned down in a barroom brawl over a card game gone sour, leaving her with a failing ranch, a mountain of debt, and a reputation as a woman who couldn't hold her own in a man's world. They whispered about her in the saloon, snickered behind their hands at the general store, and turned their backs when she rode into town, her chin high but her heart fracturing with every cold glance. Clara was no stranger to hardship. Her hands were calloused, her boots worn thin, but the weight of their judgment was heavier than any plow she'd ever dragged through the unyielding earth. Tonight, though, something was different. A man had ridden onto her land at dusk, a stranger with a weathered face and eyes that held secrets older than the hills. He called her wife, in front of the town's most powerful men who'd come to seize her ranch for unpaid debts. His words weren't just a claim, they were a challenge, a spark flung into dry grass, and Dustwood was about to catch fire. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the courage to stand against the odds, please hit that like button, leave a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks, because stories like Clara's remind us that even the broken can rise. Clara's life hadn't always been this way. Born to a seamstress and a blacksmith in a small Ohio town, she'd grown up with dreams of a quiet life, maybe a little house with a garden where she could grow roses. But love had other plans. She'd met Tom at a barn dance when she was 19, his crooked smile and reckless charm pulling her in like a moth to a flame. They married young, too young, and followed whispers of opportunity west to Wyoming, where the land was cheap and the sky endless. The ranch they bought was a patchwork of hope and hardship, 50 acres of stubborn soil, a rickety barn, and a house that creaked in the wind. For a while, they were happy, or at least they convinced themselves they were. Tom worked the fields while Clara tended the livestock, her hands learning the rhythm of milking cows and mending fences. But the land was unkind, the rains scarce, and Tom's temper grew shorter with every failed crop. He started spending nights at the saloon, chasing whiskey and cards instead of dreams. Clara stayed behind, pouring her heart into the ranch, believing if she worked hard enough, she could hold their crumbling world together. When Tom died, shot over a hand of poker he couldn't pay for, the town didn't mourn him. They mourned the money he owed, and they turned their resentment on Clara, as if she'd been the one to pull the trigger. The ranch became her prison and her sanctuary. Clara woke before dawn each day, her body aching but her will unbroken. She hauled water from the creek when the well ran dry, repaired fences torn apart by storms, and fought off coyotes that stalked her dwindling herd. The townsfolk offered no help. To them, she was a fool clinging to a dead man's dream, a woman too weak to survive the Wild West. The bank, owned by Silas Granger, Dustwood's wealthiest man, circled like a vulture. Silas was a cold, calculating figure, his tailored suits and polished boots a stark contrast to the dust-covered ranchers who bowed to his influence. He wanted Clara's land, not for farming, but for the railroad he claimed was coming, a project that would make him richer and Dustwood a speck on the map. Every month, his men rode out to remind her of the debts Tom had left, debts she couldn't pay. They'd stand at her gate, their voices dripping with mock pity, offering to buy the ranch for a fraction of its worth. Clara refused every time, her voice steady but her hands shaking as she clutched the deed, the last piece of her and Tom's dream. She wasn't just fighting for the land, she was fighting for her own worth, for the right to be more than the town's punchline. The stranger's arrival changed everything. He rode in on a bay horse, his hat pulled low, his coat dusted with the miles he'd traveled. His name was Elias Kane, a drifter with a past he didn't share and a presence that commanded silence. Clara had been chopping wood when he appeared, her axe frozen mid-swing as he dismounted and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Hensley," he'd said, his voice low and steady, "I hear you're in need of a husband." She'd laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, thinking he was mocking her like the rest. But his eyes held no cruelty, only a quiet resolve that unnerved her. Before she could send him away, Silas Granger's men arrived, 3 of them, their horses kicking up dust as they demanded the deed. It was then, with the sun sinking and the air thick with tension, that Elias stepped forward. "This woman's my wife," he declared, his words cutting through the men's sneers like a blade. The lie was bold, absurd, and it stopped them cold. Clara's heart pounded. She didn't know this man, didn't trust him, but in that moment, she saw a flicker of hope, a chance to turn the town's scorn into something else. Elias's claim wasn't just a shield, it was a gauntlet thrown at Dustwood's feet, daring them to challenge him. The days that followed were a storm of whispers and stares. Word of Elias's declaration spread through Dustwood like wildfire, twisting with every retelling. Some said he was a conman, others a gunslinger hiding from the law. Clara didn't know what to believe, but she let him stay, partly because she had no choice and partly because his presence made the ranch feel less empty. Elias worked without complaint, repairing the barn, tending the cattle, and standing guard at night when Silas's men lingered too close. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He told her he'd lost a family once, though he didn't say how, and that he'd been wandering ever since, looking for a reason to stop. Clara wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of his guarded heart, but she was too afraid of what she might find, or what she might reveal about her own. The town watched them with a mix of curiosity and contempt. At the general store, women whispered as Clara bought flour, their eyes flicking to the plain band Elias had given her to sell the lie. Men at the saloon tested Elias with hard stares, but he met them with a calm that promised trouble if pushed too far. Clara felt the weight of their judgment, heavier now with Elias at her side, but she also felt something new, defiance. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. Silas Granger didn't take kindly to being challenged. He summoned Clara and Elias to a town meeting, held in the dusty church that doubled as Dustwood's courtroom. The pews were packed with ranchers, shopkeepers, and saloon girls, all hungry for a spectacle. Silas stood at the front, his voice smooth as oil as he accused Clara of fraud, claiming her marriage was a desperate ploy to dodge her debts. He demanded the ranch be seized, his men flanking him like wolves. Clara's throat tightened, her hands clenching the worn fabric of her dress. She'd faced humiliation before, but this was different. This was her life, her home, laid bare for the town to tear apart. Elias stood beside her, his presence steadying her like an anchor in a storm. When Silas finished, Elias stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He didn't raise his voice, didn't draw the gun at his hip, but his words carried a weight that silenced the room. He spoke of Clara's courage, her resilience, the way she'd kept the ranch alive against impossible odds. He called her his wife again, not as a lie but as a vow, and challenged any man to prove she didn't deserve her land. The room held its breath, and for the first time, Clara saw doubt flicker in the townsfolk's eyes. The meeting didn't end the fight. Silas doubled down, sending men to harass the ranch at night, cutting fences and scattering cattle. Clara and Elias worked tirelessly, their days blurring into nights as they fought to hold the land together. Clara's hands bled from mending wire, her body ached from sleepless nights, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't since Tom's death. Elias was her partner, not in marriage but in purpose, and together they were stronger than she'd ever been alone. The town began to shift, too. A shopkeeper's wife brought bread to the ranch one morning, her eyes averted but her gesture clear. A young rancher offered to help round up stray cattle, saying nothing but working alongside them until dusk. Dustwood was watching, and some were starting to see Clara not as a joke, but as a woman who wouldn't break. Yet the threat of Silas loomed larger. Rumors swirled that he'd hired a gunslinger, a man with a reputation for ending disputes permanently. Clara felt fear creep in, not for herself but for Elias, who'd risked everything for a woman he barely knew. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, she asked him why he stayed. He looked at her, his eyes soft for the first time, and said, "Because you're worth fighting for." Those words broke something in her, a dam of grief and shame, and she wept for the first time in years, her tears soaking the earth she'd fought so hard to keep. The climax came on a cold morning, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Silas's gunslinger rode into Dustwood, a lean figure with eyes like a rattlesnake's. The town gathered in the street, sensing blood. Elias faced him, not with bravado but with the quiet resolve Clara had come to trust. She stood at his side, her heart pounding but her head high, refusing to let the town see her as weak. The confrontation wasn't a quick draw duel like the stories told in saloons. It was a tense, deliberate exchange, words as sharp as bullets. Elias revealed Silas's true plan. The railroad was a lie, a scheme to seize land and sell it to speculators back east. He'd found proof in letters Silas thought were hidden, and he read them aloud to the crowd, exposing the banker's greed. The townsfolk, once loyal to Silas's money, turned on him, their murmurs growing into demands for justice. The gunslinger, sensing the shift, backed down, riding out of town without a shot fired. Silas was left alone, his empire crumbling as the crowd closed in. Clara and Elias returned to the ranch, battered but unbroken, their bond forged in fire. The town didn't fully embrace them, old wounds heal slowly, but they'd earned respect, and that was enough. Clara stood on her porch months later, the ranch thriving under her and Elias's care. The fields were green, the cattle fat, and the house no longer creaked alone in the wind. Elias hadn't left, though he never called her wife again, not because the lie was gone, but because they'd built something truer. Dustwood had changed, too. The whispers were quieter now, the stares softer. Clara wasn't just the widow anymore, she was the woman who'd stood her ground, who'd turned a stranger's lie into her truth. She'd found her strength, not in Elias, but in herself, and that was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of resilience and the beauty of second chances, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to Kindness Speaks, and let us know in the comments below, what's a moment in your life when you stood up against the odds? Your story could inspire someone else, just as Clara's has inspired us.